Okay, hello. This is a continuation of my summary on how the United States is starting a new Cold War with Russia. And today's focus is going to be an overview of the Industrial Revolution. All right, this is my overview and how the Industrial Revolution, in terms of military industry, weapons production, and warfare, fits into the evolution of the economics of warfare. As you recall, I divided it up into four stages: classic empire buildings, mercantilist era, colonialism, and modern industrial machine production of weapons and munitions, including modern financing. All right. So this is a close-up look at my overview of the Industrial Revolution. Continuing down the page, it's a one-page diagram, right? Kind of packed full of material, and I'll go through it section by section. It'll probably take 4 or 5 lectures to get this done. All right. And to give you an overview of the overview, I divide the Industrial Revolution into 8 stages. All right, so I'll just briefly introduce them. The first stage is of the Industrial Revolution is machine production of textiles. The second stage is the introduction of agricultural machines for food production. Third stage is steam engines, fossil fuel powered machines, and mechanized transportation in steam trains and then in steamships. The fourth stage is machine manufacture of arms and munitions to attain something called interchangeability. I'll explain what that is later. The fifth stage is the rise of steel, chemical industry, electricity, oil, internal combustion engines, automobiles, telephone, and radio. Often called the second industrial revolution, although in my opinion that's a bit of a misconception. The sixth stage of the Industrial Revolution occurred after World War II, and it was an attempt to shift away from military industry to mass production of consumer goods. All right, things like homes, washing machines, cars, and so forth, refrigerators. Seventh stage is the rise of the service sector, right? Decline of manufacturing, often called the post-industrial era. Okay, and then the eighth stage is the rise of solid-state electronics, computer chip, robotic manufacturing, information, internet, cyber, new tech, biotech, healthcare, and artificial intelligence. Some recent stuff. Okay, now before I get into this diagram and explain the nitty gritties of everything here, I want to give you a brief overview of the 8 stages and why I divided the Industrial Revolution up into 8 stages. Okay. All right. So the focus of this section is the impact of the Industrial Revolution on the economics of warfare. It is a very narrow focus. So I want to review the diagram above on the evolution of the economics of warfare real quickly, and then show you where the Industrial Revolution fits in. All right, so when I taught this lesson, I said each of these eras were similar. There's 4 eras: classic empire building, mercantilism, colonialism, and then the industrial machine production of weapons and munitions. All right. And they're all similar in the sense that at the core is the economics, right? Through which you tap profits, you collect collective revenues, and you use that to build your military forces, to make weapons and build land forces and naval forces. All right. Then you use that to support your economics. All right. Same pattern. Now the Industrial Revolution fits in with colonialism and modern industrial production of weapons. All right. It fits in with colonialism because the rise of industries increased the volume of production, which increased demand for raw materials, which increased demand to expand into new territories to access those raw materials, and to use those new territories as markets for the purchase and absorption of manufactured goods. So home industry growth went hand in hand with colonialism here. The rise of the Industrial Revolution here. And of course, the Industrial Revolution went with the machine production of weapons. Okay. All right. So recall that machine mass production of weapons, military industry stealth, became a primary means of profit. So once they started producing weapons, it used to be that wars were profitable because you gain control of resources, shipping lanes, you control commerce, and you profit through arbitrage. All right. Now, the production of weapons itself, by itself, is a significant means of making money. Right. All right. So it is a primary means of profit from warfare, apart from capturing and controlling resources, production, industry, markets, and trade routes. Now, I know Lars will attack this section because it is vulnerable. Even though I've taught each part of it, of the Industrial Revolution and the wars, in vast, great, excruciating, detailed facts and analysis. However, the masses retain nothing. So there's nothing in their heads with which to understand what I'm saying. So they'll just think, that's crazy, unbelievable, ha 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 ha. Right? Nothing in their heads with which to see any meaning. So this overview of the Industrial Revolution is so vast in scope that it is impossible to reteach all of it in terms of detailed facts and analysis. And so the masses, having retained nothing, will have nothing in their brains with which to believe my summary statements. I'm just going to give you general overall statements, right? So because of that, it's vulnerable to attack. Why? Because I can't reteach it all and the masses have nothing in their heads. So they'll just think, that no for real, that really, really unreal. And that opinion will be based upon nothing, right? And nothing wins out, because how do you fight nothing, right? You can't force people to retain information. Now, knowing nothing, the masses are free to believe whatever baseless, self-serving, simple crap they want to believe. And that's what happens, right? People believe what they want to believe. And the best resource for doing it is ignorance. Just stay ignorant and stupid, and then you can believe whatever you want. Or Lars will make a big social reality attack wave with a simple, stupid joke. That's it. A joke will dominate their brains. A joke so simple that any fourth grader can read it in a 10-second blurb. And the effect is it will discredit and create disbelief. Right? Based upon what? Nothing other than a simple, baseless joke based on no facts, no intelligent analysis. Or Lars will blurt out an off-the-cuff, immediate, simple, stupid, blah, 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 blah attack that any fourth grader can understand. And it'll work because it is simple. Usually it's common sense, although it's based upon no facts, no analysis, nothing intelligent, right? But people can understand it without doing any research. So it's simple and easy to understand, and that makes it powerful. So here's an introduction to my general and broad overview of the Industrial Revolution. Since the onset of mercantilist policies, which began around 1600, about the time when the Dutch and the British were forming their East Indies companies, right? It had been recognized that far more profit is made from value added being made into manufactured goods than the sale of raw materials. Right? You make far more money from making a finished product than by selling raw material. The machine production of the Industrial Revolution greatly increased the volume of production, thus increasing the amount of value added. Right? As a result, industrial production surpassed mercantile arbitrage as a dominant fourth form of wealth generation. So it was industry was a way you really make your money. No longer was it just in commerce and shipping, right, from one market to another. Second, the Industrial Revolution can be divided into any number of stages. And that is one of the ways any idiot can attack my analysis. Any idiot can make up his own stages, supporting it with a simple, stupid, big attack, screaming, blah, 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 blah. His is crazy, is crazy, right? Off the cuff attack. That's a common method now. As soon as I say something, people just react and try to drown out what I say by screaming blah, 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 and trying to discredit it, adding no facts and no intelligent analysis on their own. And it's convincing for people who know nothing, right? Just make a simple, common sense, though baseless, unintelligent attack. So here are my 8 stages again. First stage is textiles. Second stage is agricultural machines. Third stage is steam engines, mechanized transportation, and fossil fuel powered machines. Fourth stage is machine mass production of weapons and munitions, and the origin of the American system of manufacturing, which eventually developed into assembly line production, which also greatly increased the volume of production and speed of production. All right, the fifth stage is steel, chemicals, electricity, petroleum, internal combustion engine, automobile, telephone. Sixth stage is mass production in consumer goods, especially big ticket items like new homes, cars, refrigerators, washing machines, dryers, any household appliance. Seventh stage is the rise of the service sector with a combined fall of agriculture and manufacturing, and the development of the hourglass labor market. Also often called the post-industrial era. The eighth stage is solid-state electronics, starting around 1947. Computer chips, that was like 61 or so. Information, internet, high-tech, any new tech. Robotic manufacturing, biotech, medicine, healthcare, right? Healthcare has become very big, almost a fifth of our GDP. That's a huge chunk in just one sector. So my stages are not strictly chronological because there is much overlap in time. The timing is based more upon when each stage attained economic impact, right? When they became important economically. Some of them were invented long before they became a large market. All right, so here's the logic behind my stages. Now, it is hard for anyone to attack the fact that textiles were the first products to be made en masse by machines, which took off around 1793 with the invention of the cotton gin. So the reason why the cotton gin was important, and it wasn't the first machines, there were many machines before this, but it was a critical machine because a rate limiting step was taking out the seeds from a cotton ball. Right, a simple thing to do, but it was very time consuming. It took a lot of labor, right? It slowed everything down, and the cotton industry was limited by this one thing. Once Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin, boy, the cotton industry took off. And so also did slavery become important in the South. All right, so here's some characteristics of the textile stage of the Industrial Revolution. So textiles machines, once powered by hand, were now powered by wind, water, or steam. And the costly, complex mechanism for this power required a factory setting, which killed the cottage industries. Right, cottage industries mean production out of a home, small scale, very limited capital. You can't afford all these machinery, powered machines. Factories had the advantage of economies of scale, especially in the use of fossil fuel fired steam engines to power machines. Right? What did I just do here? Okay. Factories required a sufficient urban workforce, which required a shift from agriculture. So the dominant form of labor prior to the Industrial Revolution was agriculture. All right. So I make ag machines my next stage. They were first invented in the 1830s, and they're my second stage because they, along with the agricultural revolution, facilitated the rise of industrial society. Right? Examples of ag machines include the McCormick Reaper, the threshing machine, both invented in the 1830s, and these were followed by the grain drill and factory manufacture of ag machines in the 1840s. Right? So the agricultural revolution, which I mentioned up here, was really the concentration of land in fewer owners. It was a concentration of land ownership. And that made the purchase and use of ag machines financially feasible. For example, let's say you got a mom and pop small farm with a few acres. Well, they're not going to be able to produce enough and to have enough profit to afford machines. Plus, when they get the machines, their plots can be so small that it's not going to be worthwhile, right? So you need to have large farms with lots of land. And that makes the use of those machines efficient and effective and, cost effective. All right. So the use of machines both lowered food price and decreased the need for agricultural workers. So the combination of concentration of land ownership, along with the use of ag machines, displaced ag workers who had to find jobs, so they moved to the cities, increasing the available supply of urban labor. And that helped the Industrial Revolution. Machine production of food helped keep food prices down, which helped keep wages down, and that also helped the Industrial Revolution. Helped keep inflation down. Steam engines, which saw the rise in their use in the 1830s, are my third stage because they had two important effects. First, they provided a cheap and reliable means of powering machines. Wind and water were less reliable. Right? Wind doesn't always blow. Water often is seasonal. It can change week to week. It can change day to day. More importantly, steam engines allowed for mechanized transportation, which opened up vast new territories for resource development, especially when the lands were away from waterways, because the best means of transporting goods back then was over water, whether it's rivers, lakes, oceans, canals. Land cannot be used to produce resources unless the goods can be transported to market. If you can't transport it to market, you can't make a profit. If you can't make a profit, you can't stay in business, right? You're just going to go out. In the United States, trains made westward expansion commercially viable. It also allowed for the commercial expansion into Mexico and Central America. That was roughly in the 1870s. The big Western expansion was post-Civil War. The Civil War was huge in making Western expansion possible. I'll show you that in a second. All right, and this led to U.S. neocolonialism. Key elements that made possible the rapid Western expansion between 1865, the end of the Civil War, and 1890, which is basically the completion of the Fifth Transcontinental Railroad right around then. So the key elements were the Civil War itself, which removed Southern political opposition to Western expansion, train technology, steel production technology, the Pacific Railway Act, which provided legal and financial means for railroad construction, construction of transcontinental railroads, the Homestead Act, which provided free land to encourage development of resources on the land, the origin of a national currency, and national banks. All these things, and land-grant colleges, all these things happened with the Civil War. Land-grant colleges were to improve agricultural resource use and engineering practice. Engineering practice, building transportation, building railroads, building bridges, building roads, constructing mines, and so forth. For European nations, trains facilitated the shift from pure mercantilism to colonialism by allowing for expansion into the interior of foreign countries for the purpose of upstream integration, right? Becoming more efficient and becoming more profitable. For Russia, trains made possible colonial expansion into Asia, especially with the Trans-Siberian Railroad. And lastly, I want to say that the economics of U.S. Western expansion was essentially identical to that of European colonialism. So our Western expansion was really colonialism expansion within our own territory, right? And again, the Civil War made that possible. For example, since the time of the establishment of Jamestown in Virginia, right around there somewhere, right? That was 1607, up until the Civil War, 1865. This was a settled territory of the United States, less than half of the continental United States. Now, this territory, even though some of these states gained statehood, they were still unsettled. They were still dominated by Indians. The Indians had to be removed, right? Put onto reservations or killed off, right, in order to settle this. And this happened from 1865 to 1890. Over half the country settled in 25 years. It took over 250 years to go from Jamestown to getting a little less than half of the country, but only 25 years, less than 1/10 the time, to get all the rest. And a big element was the Civil War and all the rest of this stuff. But that accelerated the Indian Wars, and the Indians really got whacked hard after the Civil War. All right, so steamships, another means of steam engine-powered mechanized transportation. They were 3 times faster than sail-powered vessels, and they're not dependent upon the unreliable winds. Right? Steamships also increased the volume of shipping while lowering the price for both cargo and passengers. All right, so my 4th stage industrial revolution is machine mass production of weapons and munitions, which was perfected between around 1820 and 1850. The idea for this, especially the idea called interchangeability. Interchangeability was the idea that weapons and munitions were all made to precise tolerances, so that if you bust apart on, let's say, a flintlock musket, well, you don't have to remake a whole new weapon. You don't have to custom make that new part. You have a machine made, standardized size part that is, you have a stock of, and you just replace it. It's a lot cheaper, a lot easier, a lot quicker. All right, that's the idea behind interchangeability. And the significance of this was not the formation of the military-industrial complex at that time, right? Which actually came 65 years later in World War I. This is when the military-industrial complex came into being. Instead, the significance of machine mass production of weapons was the rise of what is called the American system of manufacturing, which later developed into assembly line production, which further increased the volume and speed of industrial production. All right. My fifth stage of the Industrial Revolution is usually called the Second Industrial Revolution. But I believe that this is a mischaracterization. There was no revolution when this occurred. Right? These things were invented, but none of them achieved any appreciable effect on the economy until well into the 20th century. So things that involved in the Second Industrial Revolution that were invented at about the same time were steel production, chemical industry, electricity, petroleum, internal combustion engine, the automobile, telephone. All of these are lumped together because they were all invented around the same time in the late 19th century. Steel came early in 1856 with the Bessemer process. Open hearth process came shortly after that. But all the rest came later, mostly in the last quarter of the 19th century. However, everyone seems to overlook the fact that none of these products, except for steel, developed into a significant market until well into the 20th century. Thus, they had little economic impact in the 19th century. For example, telephones. By the end of World War II in 1945, that's pretty well into the 20th century. Only 1 in 3 homes in the USA had a telephone, right? So it wasn't a big market. All right. Now, the synthetic chemical industry did not expand until World War II. It was small. And especially after World War II, where people got really creative in synthesizing new molecules, all based upon hydrocarbon chains, so it's oil-based. Early elements of the chemical industry were dyes, right? Making dyes for textiles. Textiles are big. Making color for those textiles are big. Dyes branched off, somewhat into pharmaceuticals. The pharmaceuticals were trivial. Just a few types of drugs. Things like aspirin. Heroin was invented early, both by the Beer Company, I believe. And the isolation of cocaine, for example, used as an analgesic back then. All right, fertilizers. Fertilizers really didn't, fertilizers didn't really become synthetically made in much quantity until the 20th century. Most of the fertilizers in the 19th century were, mined potash, simple natural material, or bird guano, bird crap, right? Collected in places like Chile and Pacific Islands, like Midway Island. So, that was fertilizers, those natural sources. And then rubber, there was no synthetic rubber until the 20th century. I believe synthetic rubber was invented around 1909, 1910, all right? So the rubber back then was natural rubber from rubber trees, and the chemical process was vulcanization, the addition of carbon to make it, tougher, stronger, and more durable. All right. So electricity use did not become widespread until the 1920s. All right. Early forms of use were street lights to replace gas lights, streetcars to replace cable trolley cars, and factories. So those were early uses. And very few rich people had electricity in their homes. I mean, you had to be like the richest guy in town. Okay. Cars. Even by 1920, only 9% of the people owned a car. Cars were not widely owned until the 1950s, 60s, 70s. This is when car production became a big, huge market. After World War II. Again, that's part of the sixth stage of the Industrial Revolution, car ownership. All right, steel. Now, steel got early use. However, even in 1890, 90% of all steel produced were used in railroads. All right. So the dominant sector of the economy was still Western expansion, railroad production, resource land development for resources. Okay. And the remainder were things like barbed wire tools. Barbed wire was invented around, I believe, around 1871, and had a big impact on shifting cattle herding from open range to private plots. The use of steel in ships and skyscraper frames did not begin until the late 1880s, like 1888, 1889, right? 1890. And then, even then, it was not very dominant, growing slowly as it went along. Right? Okay, the sixth stage of the Industrial Revolution was a post-World War II attempt to avoid a slide back into depression. Recall that World War II pulled the United States out, pulled the world out of a depression, the Great Depression in our case. And it tried to avoid a slide back into that depression by shifting from war production economy to peacetime production of consumer goods, new homes, and the rise of suburbs, cars, refrigerators, washing machines, dryers, any household appliance, stoves, ovens, vacuum cleaners, etc. But the mass consumption economy could not be implemented quickly enough, and the U.S. economy contracted rapidly at the end of World War II. For example, in 1946, the economy shrank by 11.6%. I mean, that's pretty severe depression numbers right there. All right, so the seventh stage of the Industrial Revolution is the preeminence of the service sector. It occurred around 1950. And service sector jobs, some examples include, government jobs, you're providing a service, healthcare, you're providing a service, insurance, waste disposal, education, banking, financial services, legal services, consulting, mass media, hospitality industry, restaurants, hotels, casinos, tourism, transportation, retail sales, real estate sales, any entertainment, actors or musicians, recreation, cops, firemen. They all provide a service, not producing a physical product. So the historical trend in U.S. labor is depicted in the graph below. I guess I'll show you that first. All right, so here's about 1840, here's 2010, right? This is agriculture, this is service sector, and this is manufacturing, right? You see that, remember I said that ag machines came in around 1830, and that accelerated the fall here in agricultural laborers. It was a steady decrease as efficiency of machine production increased, and there's also consolidation of land as in the agricultural revolution. And then it leveled off around the 70s, right? Maybe about 3 to 4% of the population is involved in agriculture, all right? Now, manufacturing in the USA increased. Here's 1840, steadily going up. This is uh, the Roaring '20s. Here is the Great Depression starting. Great Depression. Here's World War II. World War II helped pull us out. There's manufacturing. And then by 1950, it's falling off as well. So by 1950, both manufacturing and agriculture falling off, although agriculture leveled off about here, right? And the double fall off led to a jump in the rise of service sector. So people shifted to the service sector. So you got a bump up here, increased slope. And then again, by the 70s, 80s, when agriculture is leveling off, you'll see that the service sector jobs mirror opposite of manufacturing jobs. So you see how this is going up a little bit, then dropping off. So this is going down a little bit, then climbing. Right? It's pretty much a mirror by this time here. So ag workers were in steady decline due to land consolidation and use of ag machines. The service sector surpassed agriculture as a proportion of U.S. workforce about 1905. So right there, 1905, the biggest sector is now the service sector. All right. Manufacturing industries continued to rise until about the 1950s when it began to fall, steadily going up, a little bit down, but up again. Then it falls steadily after that. After the 1950s, the combined decline of agriculture and industry increased the shift to the service sector. I told you that. You had a jump up here. Acceleration in the shift to the service sector. And the U.S. economy is now dominated by the service sector. Roughly 80% of the labor force are involved in the service sector. You're not producing stuff, per se. So the 8th stage of the Industrial Revolution is the development of solid-state electronics. Big breakthrough in electronic circuitry, especially for, miniaturization and so forth. Then the computer chip. They came around 1961. Information, internet was the decade for that, was the 90s. High tech, any new tech, robotic manufacturing, that kind of kicked in around the 1980s. Biotech, medicinal, healthcare, and artificial intelligence. So general characteristics. The old methods of market capture for economic dominance is now replaced by new market creation. All right. So the old methods of market capture included, you underprice your competition and drive them out of business. Right? You drive them out of the market, just like J.D. Rockefeller, just like a lot of countries try to do to other countries, underprice another nation, right? Devalue their currency to underprice the other nation, things like that. Military conquest and control of the market territory. So you conquer that territory, and you establish it as a colony, right? Then you have monopoly control over export of your manufactured goods to that country. Military conquest control of shipping lanes, especially strategic choke points, all right? This was applicable during the mercantile period. It was also applicable during the colonial period because you had to get your goods, from the colonies back to your home country and then back in the other direction, right? You have to make your shipping lane secure. Use of government laws, resources, favoritism to dominate a market and monopolize contracts. Well, this is still going on. Cronyism still exists. A recent example is, you could say, the Iraq invasion war and Halliburton being given in recent wars. No bid contracts, right? Total control over all logistics in the Iraq invasion war, right? They're getting a cut out of every dollar spent by every company for logistics. All right, so the new paradigm is market creation. Okay, and how it works is if you make a new technology, you can convert that into a new product or service. Now, with a new product or service, you got a brand new market. So you're not trying to dominate, to get a larger slice of a limited pie. You're making new pies, creating brand new pies, right? That's the idea. You're not trying to get a larger cut of a limited pie. You're just going to make a brand new damn pie every time you make a new technology and a new product. All right, so that's a new paradigm for economic growth. All right, so that's just an overview, introduction of the Industrial Revolution. And again, I'm going to go through each of these in greater detail, although still, this is just a very general overview. I cannot teach all the factual details. Therefore, this is subject to attack. If people don't know any better, they'll say, bullshit, blah, 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 and attack. Make big baseless attacks because I can't teach it all to them. Again, I've taught it so many times, but people retain nothing. And that's just the unfortunate way it is. Okay, so that's it for that lecture.